Picture this. London, 1666. The night sky burns crimson as flames devour the city, roofs collapsing, streets glowing like rivers of fire. Amid the chaos, whispers spread faster than the blaze itself. This was no accident. In the smoke and panic, people claimed to see shadowy figures, saboteurs vanishing into alleyways, torches in hand. But what if the Great Fire wasn't merely a disaster, but a cover-up for something far darker? The Great Fire of London remains one of history's most haunting urban disasters, a blaze that consumed nearly all of medieval London in just 4 days. Beginning in a small bakery on Pudding Lane in September 1666, the inferno destroyed over 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and left tens of thousands homeless. Officially, it was declared an accident, blamed on carelessness and wooden buildings packed too tightly together. But as the smoke cleared, rumors ignited across the city. Foreign agents, government conspiracies, and deliberate arson. Some swore they saw men carrying strange devices. Others claimed the fire spread in patterns too calculated to be chance. Behind Parliament's silence and the King's proclamations, something felt buried. A secret too dangerous to admit. Tonight, we reopen those ashes and uncover the dark theories behind London's most devastating blaze, the one they tried so hard to erase. Before we go deeper, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring dark mysteries from history, the kind that hide behind official records, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts below. Your support helps us bring more forgotten truths back into the light. The smell of smoke came first. Faint at first, curling through the narrow streets of Pudding Lane, mingling with the scent of baked bread and coal. It was just past midnight on September 2nd, 1666, when Thomas Farriner, the King's baker, retired to bed above his bakery. A single spark from his oven would change the course of history. Within hours, the city of London would become a roaring inferno, a living nightmare. Wooden houses, packed shoulder to shoulder, became kindling for a fire so powerful that it melted iron and glass. People fled barefoot into the night, their faces painted with ash, clutching what little they could carry. But amidst the chaos, as the sky turned the color of blood and the Thames reflected flames like molten gold, something strange was happening. Witnesses swore they saw men moving through the burning streets, carrying flaming torches and oil-soaked rags. Some shouted in foreign accents. Others were seen throwing fireballs into doorways before vanishing into the smoke. Londoners, panicked and desperate, began to ask the question no one wanted to hear. What if this fire wasn't an accident? Rumors spread faster than the flames themselves. The city, already tense from plague and poverty, erupted into paranoia. Shouts of Frenchmen and Papists echoed through the night as mobs turned violent. Foreign merchants were dragged into the streets, beaten, accused of arson and espionage. The Great Fire had found its first scapegoats, but deeper whispers began to rise. Whispers of sabotage orchestrated by forces within England itself. Some said it was a plot to cleanse the overcrowded city for redevelopment. Others claimed it was punishment from God. But the most chilling theory came from those who noticed the fire's pattern. How it moved not randomly, but deliberately jumping across the city in strange, almost tactical directions. "It burns where it benefits the rich," one witness muttered, "and spares where the crown holds ground." Indeed, as entire districts of commoners' homes were reduced to ash, royal buildings and properties owned by the elite often survived untouched. By dawn, the blaze had grown unstoppable. The wind, fierce and relentless, turned embers into storms of fire. Houses exploded as barrels of pitch and oil ignited, creating fiery whirlwinds that leapt from roof to roof. Samuel Pepys, the diarist who lived near the Tower of London, described standing in horror as the flames consumed entire streets, as if all the world were in flames. He recorded how the king himself, Charles II, rode out among the crowds, ordering demolitions to create fire breaks. Yet even then, the fire kept advancing, almost as if someone, somewhere, wanted it to. Later, rumors would claim that those tasked with destroying buildings to stop the blaze hesitated or delayed their work. Some said orders were confused intentionally. Others whispered that key officials stood to gain from the city's destruction. After all, London had become a decaying labyrinth after the plague of 1665. Its alleys filthy, its housing unsafe. Rebuilding would require clearing vast sections of land, something impossible without catastrophe. As the fire raged into the second day, survivors gathered on the riverbanks, watching their city crumble. Churches collapsed, bells melted, and the heat was so intense that stone itself began to crack. Yet, in the royal courts, something even more unsettling was unfolding: secrecy. The King's Council issued statements blaming foreigners, warning citizens not to spread false tales about government negligence. But eyewitnesses kept coming forward with chilling accounts. A servant swore he saw men pouring flammable liquid into cellars before the fire reached them. A merchant claimed he overheard talk of royal necessity, a phrase that vanished from all official records afterward. And somewhere in the shadows of Westminster, officials began burning documents. The line between truth and conspiracy blurred in the smoke. London's Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, became one of the most controversial figures in the entire event. When first alerted to the blaze, he reportedly dismissed it as trivial. "A woman could piss it out," he said. That decision cost the city dearly. But was it mere incompetence or something more sinister? Some historians argue that Bloodworth's delay allowed the fire to grow exactly where redevelopment was most needed: the slums around the City of London. His ties to influential builders and financiers later benefited immensely from reconstruction projects. And when the ashes cooled, King Charles II's government announced a massive urban redesign: wider streets, stone houses, centralized control. It was a modern London born from destruction. But few dared ask the obvious: had that destruction been guided by design? As the days passed, panic turned into vengeance. Foreigners were hunted. A French watchmaker named Robert Hubert was captured and forced to confess under torture that he had started the fire as part of a Catholic plot. The public, desperate for someone to blame, accepted his confession eagerly. But there was one problem. Hubert wasn't even in London when the fire began. Still, the authorities executed him anyway. His body swung from the gallows as the crowd cheered, convinced that justice had been served. Yet even then, the unease lingered. "He was too convenient," wrote one observer. "They needed a villain, and they made one." The execution closed the case officially. But behind palace doors, records suggest continued investigation. A few letters that survived hint at fears of internal sabotage, references to removals, and quiet resolutions among the court elite. It was as if the truth had been deliberately buried with the ashes. By the fourth day, the great fire began to die. Rain finally fell, and what was once one of the greatest cities in Europe was reduced to a smoking wasteland. Over 80% of the medieval city was gone. The official death toll was astonishingly low. Only 6 recorded deaths. Yet witnesses claimed that thousands had perished, their remains uncounted, incinerated beyond recognition. Bodies turned to dust were easier to forget. Amid the ruins, looters scavenged, and city officials began planning reconstruction before the ground had even cooled. Charles II appointed surveyors to draft blueprints for a new London, a cleaner, grander capital that would symbolize renewal. But for many, it felt like too swift a response, as though the plans had existed long before the flames. And here's where the story turns darker still. In 1670, just 4 years after the fire, Parliament passed the Rebuilding Act, reshaping London under new royal control. Land ownership shifted dramatically. Many of the poor who had lived in the destroyed districts never returned. Their properties were bought up by wealthy investors connected to the crown. Documents from the time suggest entire streets were redrawn to benefit commercial interests tied to royal allies. The city's transformation was breathtaking. But at what cost? Was the Great Fire merely a tragic accident, or the spark of deliberate cleansing? Imagine it. The empire's heart, reborn from ashes, not by chance, but by intention. The deeper one looks, the more the coincidences stack up. Political instability, financial crisis, growing anti-Catholic sentiment, all made the fire a perfect distraction. It unified a panicked populace under royal authority, silenced dissent, and erased neighborhoods associated with rebellion and poverty. When you trace who benefited most, the pattern points upward, toward the very institutions that claim to protect the people. But perhaps the most haunting mystery lies not in what was destroyed, but in what survived. The vaults beneath St. Paul's, containing sensitive royal and financial records, were somehow spared, even though the cathedral above burned to the ground. The fire had consumed the city's flesh, but left its bones intact. Coincidence? Or careful orchestration? When the embers finally dimmed and Londoners stumbled through the ruins, a strange silence settled over the city. Smoke still coiled from heaps of blackened stone, and the air was thick with soot and disbelief. People spoke in whispers, as if afraid the city might catch fire again, just from the sound of their voices. In that silence, the real war began. Not of fire, but of memory. The king's officials rushed to shape the narrative before the people could. They commissioned reports, pamphlets, and sermons, declaring the Great Fire as an act of divine judgment. "God has purged the city," preachers cried, their words echoing through the charred remains of churches. But others were not so easily convinced. In the taverns and marketplaces that had survived, men and women traded stories that didn't fit the official account. "I saw soldiers with torches," said one. "They told me to go home before the fire reached me." Another swore that guards blocked escape routes, forcing people toward the flames. Could it be possible that the government itself had allowed the fire to spread unchecked? Not out of neglect, but purpose? Those questions gained dangerous weight when whispers began to connect the blaze to financial debt. Before the fire, the crown was nearly bankrupt. The Second Anglo-Dutch War had drained England's treasury, and Charles II owed vast sums to private lenders and foreign merchants. Much of that debt was secured against London's property values. When the city burned, those debts, along with the deeds and ledgers that proved them, vanished in the flames. Suddenly, the king's burdens were lighter. Records show that in the years following the fire, the crown's finances mysteriously stabilized, even as the nation rebuilt. It was as if the fire had cleansed not only the streets, but the balance sheets of the empire itself. Coincidence or calculated reset? Modern historians have debated this point fiercely, but the pattern of profit is undeniable. The wealthy rebuilt stronger, richer, and closer to the throne. The poor rebuilt nothing at all, and yet the conspiratorial undertones didn't stop with economics. There was also a political shadow stretching behind the fire, the fear of rebellion. The memory of the English Civil War still haunted the royal court, and London's working-class districts had long been hotbeds of dissent. These were the same neighborhoods that burned most completely in the fire. The areas that supported parliamentarian ideals during the war, Newgate, Cheapside, and the eastern parishes, were wiped clean. Coincidentally, areas that remained loyal to the monarchy were spared by shifting winds and sudden gaps in the blaze. To some, it seemed nature itself favored the crown. To others, it was simply too precise to ignore. Samuel Pepys himself noted how the wind turned at most opportune moments, steering the fire's path like an invisible hand. But who or what guided that hand remains the unanswerable question. As London rebuilt, its architecture changed, not merely in style, but in control. Stone replaced wood, yes, but the new structures came with new ownership laws that centralized authority under royal supervision. Private citizens had to apply for building licenses, and the new city plan widened the streets for safety, but also for easier military movement. Every aspect of the redesign seemed to serve order over freedom. It was, in effect, a city remade to prevent rebellion, a fortress disguised as progress. For those who remembered the old London, cramped, dirty, but free, the change felt eerie. The fire had not just destroyed homes, it had erased an entire way of life, and somewhere behind the polite facades of newly built stone houses, old ghosts lingered. The voices of those who never escaped the flames. But the most chilling twist came from what was discovered years later. During reconstruction, workers digging near the ruins of Pudding Lane reportedly unearthed strange canisters buried beneath the debris. Containers filled with pitch, oil and resin, substances known to accelerate fire. Some dismissed them as ordinary storage from the bakery, but others claimed they were too strategically placed, too deliberate. Records from the time mention these discoveries briefly, before abruptly ending. No follow-up, no inquiry. The site was cleared within days. Some modern investigators believe these were remnants of incendiary devices, possibly placed before the fire began. If true, that would mean the blaze wasn't born from carelessness, but from planning. And yet, no one dared to speak of it publicly. London was healing, and no one wanted to reopen wounds that could shatter the fragile peace. Imagine walking those streets in the weeks after. The smell of ash, the sound of hammers, the hollow faces of survivors rebuilding from nothing. The government distributed bread and coal, organized relief, and promised compensation. But behind the charity lay control. Those who accepted aid had to register, had to sign their names into new records, effectively creating one of the earliest systems of state tracking in England. People thought they were rebuilding their city. In truth, they were building a new kind of surveillance. It was a clever tactic: rebuild the body while reshaping the soul. And all the while, the official narrative hardened like plaster. The fire was an accident, the king a savior, and the city reborn by divine grace. But if you look at the personal letters from that time, the unfiltered voices, you can hear the fear between the lines. The fire did not burn by chance, one survivor wrote. It burned as if led by unseen hands. Over the years, the legend of conspiracy refused to die. Each generation found new layers hidden in the ashes. In 1678, during the hysteria of the so-called Popish plot, pamphleteers revived the claim that the fire had been engineered by Catholics to destroy Protestant England. But others turned that accusation inward, suggesting instead that it had been staged by those within the monarchy to justify harsher laws against Catholics. The fire became a weapon of narrative. Everyone used it to shape fear in their favor. What's fascinating is how this mirrors modern behavior. Even today, after national tragedies, governments and media rush to control the story before the people can. The same urgency, the same manipulation of memory. The Great Fire of London wasn't just a physical disaster, it was a psychological blueprint for how power can rewrite trauma. And yet, even centuries later, small clues keep surfacing. Fragments of documents, diary entries, forgotten testimonies that don't fit the official line. In 2016, a historian analyzing insurance archives uncovered discrepancies in the claims made after the fire. Certain royal properties had been insured unusually high in the months leading up to the blaze, far higher than normal valuations. Even stranger, the insurers themselves were connected to figures in the King's Council. Was it foresight or foreknowledge? Perhaps both, but history has a way of protecting the powerful. The archives that might hold the truth remain sealed or mysteriously incomplete. The same question that haunted Londoners in 1666 still burns faintly in the dark corners of history. Who lit the match, and who profited when the world burned? And maybe the most haunting thought of all, what if the real conspiracy was not in starting the fire, but in what came after? The silence, the reshaping, the rewriting of guilt into providence. The great fire may have begun in a baker's oven, but it ended in the throne room, where truth itself was quietly smothered beneath a crown. And though the flames died long ago, their light still flickers in the shadows of history, daring us to look closer and ask what else was hidden beneath the ashes. Centuries passed, but the story of the Great Fire refused to fade. London rebuilt itself again and again, rising from the ashes as if to prove that destruction could never truly erase it. Yet, beneath its cobblestone streets and gleaming facades, the ghosts of 1666 still whispered. The city's official memorials spoke of courage, resilience, divine mercy, but they never mentioned conspiracy. That part of the tale lived in quiet corners, old pubs where the walls seemed to breathe with secrets, archives where ink had bled over crucial lines, and private collections where burned documents were said to still exist. As historians pieced together fragments of the past, a pattern emerged, too deliberate to ignore. Records that might have proven government involvement in the fire had been systematically removed or altered during the 17th century. Entire pages vanished from parliamentary journals. Letters written by key witnesses simply disappeared. It was as though someone had swept through time itself with a broom, clearing away the evidence before future generations could see the truth. But even the most careful cover-up leaves traces. In one surviving note from 1667, a royal surveyor mentioned receiving special instructions from the Privy Council about the concealment of unfit observations regarding the fire's origins. Another fragment, discovered in the 1800s, contained an order from Charles II to destroy certain diagrams pertaining to St. Paul's vaults. To most historians, these lines are cryptic curiosities, but to those who look closer, they suggest the existence of a deeper plan, perhaps a deliberate burning of the old city to reshape its power structure. What better way to consolidate control than to erase the past physically? After the fire, London's medieval layout, a maze of rebellion, poverty, and independent trade, was replaced by wide boulevards and central oversight. It was a literal rewriting of space. And what's more chilling is that it worked. The people accepted it. The fire was no longer tragedy. It became legend, sanctified by time and architecture alike. Yet there were those who could not let it rest. Generations of skeptics, journalists, radicals, even architects, kept probing the inconsistencies. Some pointed to the curious timing of rebuilding contracts, awarded within mere days of the disaster. Others questioned the miraculous survival of certain royal warehouses filled with imported goods, spared even as neighboring streets turned to cinders. The Great Fire was, in a sense, the first modern conspiracy theory, a riddle born of fear and control. And perhaps that's why it still resonates today. Because when we look at how quickly blame was shifted, how easily truth was managed, it feels uncomfortably familiar. History repeats not just in actions, but in patterns of silence. Governments still move swiftly to frame events before public outrage finds direction. Disasters become tools for reform. Tragedy becomes opportunity. The Great Fire of London might have been born of flame, but its legacy burns in how power tells stories, not of what happened, but of what must be believed. But what of the ordinary people, the ones who lived and died in those flames? Their voices are mostly gone, reduced to names on lost registers, their ashes scattered where the streets now hum with modern life. Yet some fragments remain. One letter, preserved by accident in a merchant's ledger, describes a mother searching for her children through burning alleyways. "I heard them call once," she wrote, "and then there was only the roar." Her grief was never recorded in official reports. Her house, like thousands of others, was rebuilt by strangers. Her memory became part of the fire's invisible toll, the human cost erased in favor of architectural glory. When people today stand at Monument, gazing up at the column built to honor the fire's end, few realize that it once bore an inscription blaming Catholics for the disaster. That inscription was chiseled away in 1830, nearly 170 years later, as if to quietly correct a centuries-old lie. The truth changes form, but the fire's smoke still lingers in the city's air. There is a theory, whispered among archivists and historians, that a sealed collection of royal correspondence from the 1660s still exists. Letters between the king and his council detailing the fire's true purpose. Some claim it lies hidden in the royal archives at Windsor. Others say it was destroyed long ago. But even the rumor of its existence keeps the legend alive. Imagine what those letters might reveal. Orders to let the blaze spread. Promises of compensation to loyal investors. A confession buried in elegant script. If such documents ever came to light, they could rewrite the history of London itself. But perhaps that's why they remain unseen. Some secrets are too powerful to survive exposure. Power, after all, is not built on truth, but on what truth can be buried beneath the weight of time. When you walk through modern London, you can still trace the scars if you know where to look. The angles of certain streets, the unusual spacing of buildings near the old city wall, all echo the fire's path. Even the stones beneath St. Paul's Cathedral hold traces of that inferno, scorched black from 1666. The city wears its past like a ghost beneath its skin. And maybe, in some way, that's fitting. Because London was never just rebuilt. It was reborn, reimagined, repurposed by those who held the quill and the gold. The Great Fire was their crucible, and out of it they forged a new empire. The question that haunts us now isn't just whether the fire was planned, but what it tells us about how easily history can be engineered. When destruction becomes creation, who decides what rises from the ashes? Perhaps that's why the story still captivates. It's not just about fire. It's about control, manipulation, and the rewriting of destiny. The same mechanisms that shaped 1666 still operate today, only with different tools. Back then, it was fire and parchment. Now, it's information and narrative. In every age, power burns away the inconvenient truths and rebuilds the story in its own image. The Great Fire of London was the blueprint. The lesson it left behind is chilling. When catastrophe strikes, always ask who benefits, because sometimes the brightest flames hide the darkest hands. The Great Fire of London may have ended more than 3 centuries ago, but its embers still glow in history's shadows. It wasn't just a fire that consumed a city. It was a reckoning that revealed how easily truth can be shaped by those in power. What began as tragedy became transformation, and what was once grief became order. The fire reminds us that behind every official story lies another, quieter, darker, waiting to be uncovered. Perhaps the real conspiracy wasn't about who lit the match, but who decided what the flames were allowed to erase. So next time you walk through London's shining streets, remember that beneath every stone lies ash, and beneath every monument, a secret. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, like the video, and tell us in the comments what other forgotten histories or dark conspiracies you'd like us to explore next. Your curiosity keeps these hidden stories alive, long after the smoke has cleared.